If there's one thing that Miura sensei wasn't shy of doing, it was adding more apostles to the series. These demonic reincarnates form the spiral column of Berserk's rogues gallery after all. Apostles were the first creatures introduced to the series alongside Guts himself. They might be thralls to the God Hand, but they're the ones doing the dirty work in the physical world on behalf of their masters. The God Hand's plans stretch across space and time, so naturally there have been hundreds, if not thousands of apostles throughout history. And that number might be consistent with where the population stands today as well, considering Griffith has consolidated every living apostle into a single force of war demons. But out of these myriad abyssal monstrosities, who is the weakest, who's the strongest, and why? We're sure you guys have asked yourself this question many times before, so we're here to put it to bed. In this video, we're going to be ranking every single apostle and pseudo-apostle that we see in Berserk, from weakest to strongest. So without further ado, let's get straight to it. Man-made Behelit. Okay, now we know starting this list off with a technicality isn't a great idea, but there is good reason for the man-made Behelit's inclusion on our list. It's an apparatus made out of living apostles that can do nothing about the situation. Think about it. The man-made Behelit is the only thing that we've seen in series that treats apostles like ingredients. Every single one of the 60-odd reincarnates stitched into it is living their worst nightmare. Because apostles are the ones that make humans feel helpless, not the other way around. Well, we suppose they were collected on the orders of an apostle, so it isn't too surprising. But still, the primary purpose of all these apostles was to act as a demonic womb to birth Ganishka's darker soldiers. That's it. The fact that they got rounded up so easily must mean that they were either not very strong, or their capturer was. Either way, being reduced to a factory machine is the most powerless we've seen an apostle be in this series, and that counts. Another reason for the man-made Behelit being on our list is the fact that despite its scale and scope, the difference that its creations make on the field of battle is practically negligible. The Darker look scary, but they aren't that tough, and die as easily as human Kushan soldiers. The only advantage this process gives the Dread Emperor is control over their thoughts and actions, which is sort of pointless when they get killed en masse all the time. The apostles of the man-made Behelit are at the bottom of our list for all of those reasons. Funnily enough, it's also involved in the creation of the strongest apostle on this list, so make sure you stick around. Rosine's Elves, the first pseudo-apostle entry on our list, and if you've seen our anatomy video on these guys, well, you'll know why they're this low on the list. It's not like Rosine's Elves are not a threat. Unlike the man-made Behelit, they can move around pretty much through any terrain imaginable, and when there are hundreds of them gathered in a swarm, they can reduce an entire village's population to zero within a few minutes. Being pseudos, Rosine's Elves are cannibals, and their released states are a thing of terror, especially when they decide to play war amongst themselves. But the fact of the matter is, Rosine's Elves are bugs at the end of the day, and as Guts demonstrates in Chapter 99, bugs burn real nice. Regular humans might have had a better shot of dealing with them if they weren't scared witless by their arrival. Massive fires, torches, anything incendiary could have helped them defend themselves. Swords might not have worked unless they had the length and width of Dragon Slayer, but they had the means. They just never utilized them out of their own cowardice and fear. Many of the villagers from that chapter were former soldiers, and yet the first reaction was to hide behind closed doors when their homes were invaded. Guts single-handedly slaughters all of them across the Lost Children arc, and with such ease that they ended up feeling like nuisances more than anything. If they were moving solo, killing them would be like swatting a fly for the Black Swordsman. But they're above the man-made Behelit because at least the damage they do is of their own making. And also they can get pretty mean when they're on a raid. Female Apostle. The very first demonic reincarnate that we meet in Berserk, this female apostle tried to turn Guts into dinner in the opening sequence of the series. Instead, she was the one who ended up getting cooked, and we do mean that literally. From a chronological standpoint, the female apostle was introduced during the eclipse. Towards the end of Chapter 80, the ever-arrogant Corcus has a full-fledged mental breakdown. We don't blame him for it. The guy had walked into hell without even knowing that's where he was headed. As he ran away from the Inhumans' twisted feet, Corcus started convincing himself that everything was a dream. And as if to prove his point, a naked woman appears in front of him. Now, everyone that's even remotely familiar with Berserk's material knows that Corcus is a lecherous loudmouth. Women are his weakness, and he doesn't resist that weakness even within this nightmare. He hugs her and cries as the woman, who turns out to be an apostle, prepares to devour him. Fast forward to the events of the Black Swordsman chapter, which takes place 2 years after the eclipse, and she tries to pull the same trick on Guts. What she doesn't know is that he's far more prepared to kill her than she ever could be, had the roles been reversed. I mean, the man was knee-deep in her guts when she transformed, and he still managed to kill her by stuffing his arm cannon down her throat and letting it loose. He never really saw eye to eye with Corcus, but this vengeance was one that was easily accomplished for the Black Swordsman, considering the female apostle couldn't bite as quickly as she could flash her fangs. Keeper of the Hounds. The first target that Guts hunts down following his war declaration, the Hound Apostle was mostly a vehicle for conveying two major points. One, that if bearers of the brand of sacrifice remained outside of a protected region like Godo's Cave for too long, they'd eventually be discovered by apostles. And two, the introduction of Dragon Slayer. He arrived at Goddo's hut in chapter 93, and in the very next chapter, we see Guts make light work of him. The Black Swordsman cuts him up even with the regular sword that Goddo had given him, but it turns out to not be enough in the face of inhumans like apostles. His blade eventually shatters, and the Hound Apostle uses its entrails to throw Guts into Goddo's armory shed. He's able to fend off the approaching apostle with a blast from his brand new arm cannon, courtesy of Rickett, and just as he looks for a finishing stroke, Guts spots Dragon Slayer. He uses it to push the Hound Apostle back by cutting into his shoulders, and then using the opening to bisect him cleanly. The sight of him holding up that blade with the demon's entrails hanging off of it sends shivers through Goddo's spine, and he's been alive longer than Guts, Rickett, and Erica combined. With his equipment battle-tested, the Black Swordsman heads off into the dark night that awaits him for the rest of his life. The 2016 anime tried to give this apostle a bit more to work with by combining his storyline with the slug counts and the introduction of Fornace and Serpico. But not even giving him control over the possessed dogs from chapter 123 could increase his threat factor. In the end, he was merely an example of the kind of destruction humans could wreak upon demons. Egg of the perfect world. It might surprise some of you to see this guy so low on our list, but to be completely frank with you, from the perspective of power scaling, the Egg of the perfect world can't be more perfectly placed. This is because while it does possess immense amounts of astral energy and has created some of the toughest pseudo-apostles in the series, which you'll learn more about soon enough, he also can't really fight. Those of you who have seen our Egg of the perfect world anatomy video will know this, and those of you who haven't should really go check it out, because he's one of Berserk's most interesting characters. But what we're trying to say is that the Egg's primary purpose in life was to survive until the incarnation ceremony reached its climax. Because of that, its form was most suited to dodging attacks instead of inflicting them, and he looks like a behelit because his body functions like one. To be fair to him, the Egg could have probably dealt with human enemies with considerable ease. So it's his bad luck that he faces the most skilled fighter in the series, not named Guts. Skull Knight, the wandering wraith, corners the Egg on 2 occasions and leaves it with a mortal injury. But at least the guy is quick enough to escape alive both times. That's the only thing the Egg has going for it. Speed. He's quick as a cat, and that's a step ahead of Skull Knight's reaction time, which is saying something. Oh, and he can also create supercharged pseudo-apostles pretty much at will, so that too. But in terms of his individual battle capacity, the Egg is one of the weaker apostles out there. Rosine's Guardians. Bandits. Rosine's elf bugs might be mean in a swarm, but her guardians are meaner and far stronger than the children they protect. And they don't need hundreds to make a difference in a battle. A couple dozen of them are usually enough. Their appearances continue the insect theme that Miura established with Rosine and her pseudos. In fact, we even see some of her guardians attacking the reserve unit of the Band of the Falcon in chapter 52. But unlike the elves, who mostly transform into variations of hornets and wasps, Rosine's guardians have access to more varied forms: scorpions, mosquitoes, ants, centipedes, cockroaches, beetles, spiders. Name any disgusting critter you wouldn't want to be encountering on a regular day, and chances are she had a guardian in that form. Guts encounters them in chapter 105, and the initial encounter he has is with the bandits he killed in chapter 95. He takes out 2 of them with relative ease, but the other 2 manage to corner him pretty well. One of them uses its beetle head to grab Guts' throat, while the other spidered its way down into his brain. But the Black Swordsman quick thinking wins out once again. He kills both pseudos with one spinning motion, and then prepares to face off against the rest of the Guardians, of which there are over 20. Guts pokes holes in all their bodies with his rapid-fire crossbow, and then finishes their still-moving carcasses with Dragon Slayer. By the time he's done, he's got 2 pseudo-apostle heads latched onto his cannon arm, and he squishes them both with disgusting ease. He looks exhausted from his effort. Yeah, he did just wipe out the equivalent of a small battalion in chapter 105. But overall, he comes out of it no worse than he went in, except for the wound he sustained in that first engagement. This changes when he comes up against the next type of Rosine's Guardians. Rosine's Guardians, Knights. While Rosine's Guardians were resilient and a decent fight when they got together in a group, none of them possessed any sort of proper training. They were feral warriors, relying on instinct and pouncing on Guts the first chance they got, which is a terrible idea if you know anything about him. But out of all of Rosine's Guardians, 2 turned out to be Knights, and we've separated them from the rest because these 2 give Guts his biggest challenge since the next entry on our list, and that's saying something. But before we get to that person, let's talk about these 2 former Knights from chapter 106. One of them had the release date of a massive rhinoceros beetle, and the other had the form of a praying mantis as large as a human being. You could tell they were far more experienced in battle than the rest of the brethren, because Mantis Dude rushes for Guts as though he's going to grab him, but then keeps his distance and slashes Guts' arms with his own instead. His speed is something that catches the Black Swordsman completely off guard, and before he can recover, Rhino Beetle charges him with his horn. The pair proceeds to tag team the living hell out of Guts, and he himself admits that they're much tougher than the usual thoroughfare. When he tries to dodge or deflect the Mantis' hands, the Beetle charges him, and when he tries to deal with the Beetle, the Mantis grabs his hands. Guts manages to nearly decapitate the former, but its thick exoskeleton and the fact that Guts' body was already engaged elsewhere allowed it to survive. The pair decide to attack him from both sides at the same time, and in the last possible moment, Guts comes up with his new signature move, the Twisting Blast Slash. He fires his cannon in the direction of the beetle and uses the momentum to cut both of his opponents at the same time, thereby solving the problem of attacking both in front and at back. This only fight lasts for a couple of chapters, but these two give the Black Swordsman more than a decent challenge, and also force him to come up with a brand new technique to deal with them, which is quite an achievement, believe us. Zondark, the very first pseudo-apostle of the series. Zondark is one of the few characters that can say he survived a tussle with the Black Swordsman twice. Most people die the first time around, and Zondark would have had he not had his soldiers with him. The first face-off took place back when the captain of the guards was still human, and Guts utterly humiliated him. Zondark took his size and strength advantage to mean that his victory would be certain. Instead, he got a face full of metal and permanent hatred for the Black Swordsman, with the latter directly leading to his reincarnation. You can find out more details on Zondark's anatomy from our video on it, but we'll just give you the short version. Once he was taken back to the palace for treatment, his master, the Slug Count, saw his desire for revenge against Guts and decided to turn him into a pseudo-apostle in his own likeness. Demon Zondark and Guts' first fight was a close affair, because since becoming a demon, the former's strength and abilities had increased exponentially. In Chapter 4 of the Black Swordsman arc, Demon Zondark ambushes Guts in the laboratory of the former court physician Vargas, and their battle is one to behold. The Black Swordsman is shocked to see Zondark survive after the injuries he sustained, but when he noticed the considerable difference in his strength compared to the last time, Guts figured Sonny Boy had become a pseudo, but Zondark just grows an uglier, slimier, and far more agile one from its stump. With his new arm, he swings his axe around so wildly that the human eye can't keep up with it, and Guts can only manage to do so thanks to his years of experience when it came to fighting demons. He cuts off Zondark's other arm and a part of his head as well. But the Slug Count uses his thrall's body to manifest himself and continue the fight, presumably healing Zondark's injuries. He overdoes it when he tries to go all out on Guts without considering the height of the room they were standing in, and that allows the latter to escape. Their final encounter has no such restrictions. Initially, it looks like Guts has this one in the bag. He riddles Zondark's body with his rapid-fire crossbow to the point his monstrous parasite-esque form can't even respond in time. Guts discards Zondark's body and starts walking toward the Count's throne room, but just then, he's caught off guard. Turns out, Zondark didn't die. He managed to catch himself mid-fall and turn the tables on Guts by slicing through his back. He reveals that as long as his head is attached to his body, nothing could kill him, which was his biggest mistake. Even mortal injuries aren't enough to keep the Black Swordsman down, and he, slicing off Zondark's head, squashes it into monster pulp to ensure he doesn't act up again, and then thanks him for the advice. Had he not discovered the pseudo-apostle's weakness in time, Guts would have been in major trouble. Even after he killed the beast, he struggled to get to the Count's throne room because he'd lost so much blood. The rest of the characters we've mentioned so far couldn't keep up with half the damage that Zondark took, which is why he's this high on our list. The Great Goat. From a slug-type pseudo-apostle to a goat-type pseudo-apostle, the Great Goat was the definition of a side villain. He was birthed by the egg of the perfect world in the middle of the conflict between the heretics of St. Albion and the Holy Iron Chain Knights. He barely made it past a couple of chapters as a pseudo-apostle, but the potential he displayed in that time has us convinced that if he knew what he was doing, he'd be far more dangerous. You can find the details on his anatomy from our Great Goat anatomy video, but basically, his pseudo-transformation saw him turn into a gigantic monster satyr. He makes his entry in chapter 147 by crushing 2 fully armored knights to death with his hooves, and then immediately impales a third using his horns. He could have easily wiped out every Holy Iron Chain Knight in that cave, followed by every heretic had he not been distracted by Casca, and then Guts. The Black Swordsman chops off the Great Goat's great serpent and his left arm as an introduction, but perhaps he should have taken a different strategy, because all it does is piss off the pseudo even more. The Great Goat proves to be more of a challenge than Guts expected. He uses the swordsman's body as leverage to bounce around the cave and come down on him hoof first with as much intensity as he could muster. Had Guts not had Dragon Slayer and Godot's armor, he'd have lost his spine in that battle. The Great Goat was durable enough to tank hits from his sword and his crossbow, and quick enough to avoid both when he hit his rhythm. Guts had an extremely hard time tying this guy down because he just wouldn't stop hopping all over the shop, and because of his erratic movements, it was difficult to land a blow powerful enough to finish things off. It was thanks to his upgraded arsenal, which included mini explosives, that he was able to kill the Great Goat as quickly as he did. Those explosives were a brand new addition to Guts' weaponry, and without them, he couldn't have pulled this kill off. His arm cannon's activation time itself was long enough for the Great Goat to turn him into shish kebab, and for all those reasons, we think he deserves a spot in the top 20, no matter how punky his death might have been. Snake Baron. One guy who wasn't easy to deal with, even without the terrain disadvantages, was the first proper mini-boss apostle Guts hunted down. Now, we're not talking about the female we mentioned a few entries ago, we're talking about the Snake Baron. The unofficial ruler of Koka had the town cowering under his iron fist. He would accept tributes of flesh and gold, torture and execute any that dared cross him with the help of the town's mayor. After Guts attacked a few of his men in an inn and rescued Puck in the process, the Baron was prepared for bloodshed. He was aware of Guts' reputation as an apostle killer, and to be quite honest, he wanted to have a showdown with the Black Swordsman. Come nightfall, he launched a raid on Koka, burnt the buildings, killed the townspeople, and drank some of the blood in plain view of everyone present just to show that he meant business this time. The Black Swordsman emerged from a mound of corpses and flooded the Snake Baron with his rapid-fire crossbow, but it only managed to get him off his horse and push him through a wall. Once he was sufficiently agitated, the Baron assumed his released form and attacked Guts with such ferocity that at one point we thought he was dead. In his true state, the Snake Baron looks like a massive anthropomorphic cobra with a tail that's thicker than a tree trunk. He used his tail to whip Guts around like a toy, and when he brought it down on the swordsman's back, so much blood leaked out of Guts' body that we were pretty sure he died. No human could withstand his tail whip the first time around, let alone half a dozen times. The Snake Baron thought the same, evidently, because he approached Guts' limp body and lifted it effortlessly, preparing to devour the guy on the spot. He was so confident of his victory that he let his guard all the way down and ended up eating a face full of cannon fire from Guts. The Black Swordsman mercilessly kills the Snake Baron after this turnaround, but up until that point, he was getting the bones beaten out of him. By killing the Baron, Guts also avenged another one of his fallen comrades, because he too was present at the eclipse. Mosgus' disciples. We're dipping our toes back into pseudo-apostle territory for a second, because no list about Berserk power scaling would be complete without Father Mosgus' torturer disciples. Even before they became pseudos, these 6 heralds of pain and anguish could only be described as inhuman, and we aren't making fun of their appearances. Having served as Mosgus' primary punishment dispensers for so long, they've become numb to the gruesomeness of their task, which involves treating people like vegetables. But they prove their strength and mental resilience by pretty much quelling a rebellion in Chapter 132. Each of Mosgus' 6 disciples possess weapons unique to their purpose. One of them uses a steel claw to capture those who would escape God's justice. Another has 2 pliers in his hands which he uses to gouge out the eyes of deceivers. 2 of them co-wield a massive pair of cutters that can slice half a dozen people to their deaths in one go. The behemoth of the crew carries a gigantic wooden wheel with which he crushes those who would harass his leader. And the leader of the pack has a modified neck trap mounted at the head of a lengthy staff with which he can efficiently subdue attackers while keeping them at a distance. When they work together, Mosgus' disciples were pretty much unstoppable. Once they transformed, they became invincible to harm from any human that wasn't named Guts. Mosgus' disciples gained all the traits typical to a pseudo-apostle. Their muscles became more muscly, their teeth turned into fangs, and limb dismemberment no longer affected their movement. What's more is each of them gained wings just like Mosgus, increasing their range of motion exponentially. The leader's wings could also function as projectiles, which basically made Mosgus' disciples a terrifyingly balanced pseudo-apostle hit squad. Guts slashed through a pillar, chopped off one of their arms, protected his eyes from getting gouged out, and replied to a wheel thrust with Dragon Slayer, all in the span of a few seconds. This first engagement gave me an idea of just how difficult of a fight this was going to be, because the teamwork and coordination of Mosgus' disciples was unmatched. They knew each other's strengths and weaknesses like the back of their hands, and so whenever they went after Guts, they did so together. At one point, they managed to restrain his hands and head, and babyface Pseudo smashed him twice in the chest with his breaking wheel. An ordinary man would have died at the first swing, but Guts waited for the third in order to use it for his counterattack. His arm cannon came in clutch here, because if he didn't have that, defeating Mosgus' disciples would have been a pipe dream. His explosives also came in handy, and while he didn't directly dispatch of 2 of the 6, his presence was involved there as well. It took Guts nearly 6 chapters to take down 4 of Mosgus' disciples. That kind of panel time is usually reserved for apostles. That's how powerful these guys became, and that's also why they're so high up on this list. Wild. The first apostle that Guts actually managed to defeat by himself. Wild isn't this high on our list for that reason alone. It's also because he might have been mortally injured by a human, but it took the strongest apostle to actually kill him. An old man who accepted the God Hand's offer of reincarnation to lead a life of enjoyment and excitement, Wild was the prototypical apostle when it came to how he viewed things post-reincarnation. He did things to satisfy his own lust for flesh and blood, and he ruled over his Black Dog Knights with nothing but pure fear of himself. He became their leader by impaling another criminal at the top of a tower spire, and since that day, none had dared question his authority. Even in his base form, Wild is immensely powerful, as he was able to fell a tree with a single punch. He parried all of Guts' blows using instinct and a club, which is sheer insanity in and of itself. This is post-peregrination Guts we're talking about. At this point in time, his swordsmanship was at its peak, and yet Wild was using reflexes to stop incoming when it would take any other fighter a lifetime of training to do so. The Apostle also killed Guts' horse with one punch and stopped his armor-crushing sword with his bare teeth. One clubbing blow from Wild sent Guts skidding back several meters through the forest, and we haven't even mentioned his released form yet. King Kong's demonic three-eyed brother can uproot a tree by its trunk with such ease, you'd think he was picking an arrow from the ground. Wild smacked Guts around like a toy and slaughtered dozens of falcons during the rampage that followed. He nearly violated Casca, but the future Black Swordsman was determined to get his first win against monsters as nothing more than a human. He endured all sorts of punishment, including being treated like a baseball pitch through the trees, just to land cuts on the guy that didn't keep him down. He slashed through both of Wild's arms and legs, chopped off his second pee-pee, bisected his midsection open, and he showed no sign of slowing down. It was only when he landed a slash across Wild's second face that he realized what had put a permanent end to this nightmare. This fight had left him with many broken bones and cracked ribs, but with victory in sight, Guts had one more plan up his sleeve. He used 2 decoys to lure Wild into the perfect position, and then he drove his sword through the guy's neck. The ape Apostle was virulent enough to keep hitting him even after sustaining such a mortal injury, but Guts didn't give in. He stabbed Wild's eye with his dagger and drove both blades deep into his upper body. This felt like a move that should have killed the Apostle, but it didn't, though he was now real close to death's door. Wild tries to save himself by kidnapping Griffith and trying to use his Behelit, but in doing so, he betrays his own Apostlehood. Frustrated by not finding the device on Griffith, Wild decides he's gonna kill the guy, and is killed instead by Zod. Even then, he has enough left in him to argue with the Immortal One before finally bleeding out. Wild was the first Apostle that Guts technically defeated, and the fact that he did it before he got any of his Apostle-killing equipment is what makes it so impressive. The Black Dog Knight's inhuman strength and resilience were just as impressive, if not more. War Demons fodder. We figured the topic of how we're ever going to rank the hundreds of apostles under Griffith's service as his War Demons is going to come up sooner or later in this video. We thought why not bring it up ourselves and hit 2 birds with 1 stone. Because it's true that most of Griffith's War Demons are standard apostles, but given that the power of a standard apostle greatly varies based on their egos, it's really difficult to rank them all individually. Well, that, and also the fact that Miura never gave us a name for any of these rank and file, or focused on a solitary war demon long enough for us to gauge their strength. But what we can tell you is this. Though we've called them fodder, that's only in front of Berserker Guts and Skull Knight. For the rest of the world, Griffith's war demons might as well be unstoppable, except maybe the Kushan Empire in the current story arc of Berserk. Even non-Berserker Guts had trouble dealing with Griffith's new beaks and talons in chapter 223, and given his physical condition at the end of the latest chapter, we don't think even he can hope to meet them in battle without that armor. Many of the war demons were also participants for the Eclipse, which is why they recognize Guts and Skull Knight when they see them. And the fact that they made it out of his rampage from chapters 80 through 82 tells you that they're plenty tough, because in those chapters, Guts truly went Berserk mode, even without the titular armor. As a consolidated force, Griffith's war demons cover every arena of war. Lancers, archers, and a goddamn aerial unit that's led by the Immortal One himself. As long as they're kept occupied in pandemonium and on the march alongside Griffith, they'll always be the most overpowered army in the world, but individually, they shouldn't be harder to beat than any of the characters we've mentioned so far. Ganishka spawns. We can't possibly continue this video without talking about the greatest collective challenge so far, which, surprisingly enough, comes in the form of pseudo-apostles. But when you take one look at the size and the sheer numbers of pseudo-spawns that Emperor Ganishka birthed in light of his reincarnation, you might start understanding where this rating is coming from. These pseudos were created when the Dread Emperor stepped on his own soldiers' bodies in his Lovecraftian Shiva form. This killed those soldiers and mutated them into tentacle and fang pseudo-apostles, all of whose faces matched Ganishka's. No 2 Ganishka spawns are alike in that many of them seem to have stopped growing after a certain stage of development. Some of them have arms, some don't. Some of them have lower bodies, others don't. But what all of them have in common is the fact that they're all huge, and their mouths are conveniently placed in order to devour whatever dares to attack them head-on. The engagement between Griffith's army and Ganishka's spawns, which lasted from chapter 298 to 302, showed us just how arrogant one would be to take the latter on, thinking them to be mindless. A single Ganishka spawn is thrice the size of Griffith's apostles, and they themselves are twice the size of a regular human. It takes humans and apostles working together in unison to defeat these guys, because by themselves, the war demons might not have had much of a chance. After which, all of them turn into the trees you see outside of Falconia in chapter 307. Up until that point, Ganishka spawn kept the pressure on the Falcon's people, and even managed to reach their religious figurehead. Had they succeeded in taking the Pope out, it could have shifted the morale of the entire battle, but alas, they couldn't. Borkov. This guy is a bit difficult to place because we haven't seen him in action a lot, but every time we have, he gets up to some grimy stuff, so we wanted to take some time out and mention Borkov. On the surface, he's just another member of Locus's Lancer unit. Borkov looks like what we imagine a demonic anteater would look like, only massive. The one time he was called by name, he was asked to create an escape route for his brethren, and he did just that, bursting through every wall in the city of Wyndham. We also see him absolutely go to town on an ogre in chapter 336, and ogres are tough customers. But what brings Borkov so far up our list is the fact that he's the apostle that took Guts' left arm. That's right, folks. Borkov is responsible for one of the most iconic character designs in manga history, and the creation of that design involved legwork on his end as well. Or shall we say jaw work? Because Borkov chomped down on Guts' hand hard enough to keep it in place while he tried to struggle his way toward the reborn Griffith. The Black Swordsman tried attacking Borkov's scales to free himself, but his sword shattered with a couple of hits. That's how hard Borkov's scales are. Guts was forced to hack off his own arm to free himself, because he just didn't have any other way out. Of course, if they were to meet again today, things would play out a bit differently, but we can't tell how differently. Borkov's body is still as hard as it was back in the Eclipse, and though Guts has Dragon Slayer now, Borkov's got a whole army behind him. Plus, he's a Lancer as well, so don't forget that detail. His lance could very well check Dragon Slayer in a pseudo joust, considering lances are the only thing as big as that slab of iron. It'll be very interesting to see if he meets Guts again in the story, because we imagine the Black Swordsman would definitely want to get revenge on him for his lost left arm and his role in Casca's violation. Slug count. Guts' first extended fight against an apostle was a great introduction to their incredibly tenacious and destructive nature, because if we're being honest, the Snake Baron was tough, but he wasn't all that. Guts took care of him in a single chapter. The slug count gave Guts his most difficult fight out of every character we've mentioned so far, and killing him was sweet revenge, because this was the same apostle that killed Pippin during the Eclipse. The Black Swordsman's battle with the Count was spread across 2 massive chapters, one of which saw Guts get his butt handed to him on a steel platter. Their fight began with the Count faking him out and attacking him from below. When Guts anticipated it and countered appropriately, the Count took on his released form, and immediately a massive hole was blown through the walls of his castle. The Count's body was massive, and each time Guts cut off a limb of his, it grew bigger and stronger. The fact that they were fighting inside of his throne room heavily restricted Guts' movements, and his first decoy strategy failed, which led to him getting bashed on walls and fallen pillars alike. He was already bleeding profusely, and the Count's smackdown on him would have insta-killed any normal man. If it wasn't for the distraction Puck created with his impromptu speech, Berserk would have ended in its 5th overall chapter, but that's one of the reasons Miura created his character in the first place. The elf drew the slug away from Guts long enough for the swordsman to recover and hit his target with some throwing knives, but it was clear that the damage had already been done to him. He couldn't walk straight, he had at least 3 broken ribs, and his enemy was in top shape. Guts realized he needed a more effective decoy, so he allowed the slug count to kick him into yet another pillar just so he could use his own daughter against him. This worked, and Guts caught the apostle with a face full of gunpowder, but the entire process had taken too much out of him. His damn fingers were broken. He couldn't even hold Dragon Slayer, so he pulled off his most feral kill from the prequel arc by gripping it with his teeth and then leveraging his cannon arm to cut through the slug. Where most apostles would have been dead after decapitation, the slug count managed to survive. Not just that, no matter how many times Guts attacked his decapitated head, it didn't seem to make any difference. He broke his dagger stabbing slug count's head, and he still didn't die. What finished him off was him refusing to take the God-Hand's deal of a second reincarnation in exchange for his daughter, because she was the only thing left in this world that he truly loved. Had he not been put in the position of choosing between his daughter and himself, we're pretty sure the Count would have still been in the story. Rosine. Let's move on to the Count's partner in crime during their little detour from the Eclipse in chapters 51 and 52. As a human, Rosine was a wild child that spent most of her days in the woods and her nights getting traumatized at home. Eventually, things got so bad that she ran away, and when her abusive dad found her again, she lost her will to live as a human. Rosine had always wanted to be an elf, so, with the help of her Behelit, she sacrificed her parents and became an elf-like apostle. The fact that she created 2 distinct types of pseudo-apostles and their sheer numbers themselves should tell you why Rosine is so high on our list. But if that isn't enough to convince you, then chew on this. She's the only apostle Guts had to get hit by in order to hit back. This is because even in her base form, Rosine is nearly as quick as the speed of sound, and in her released form, she could break the sound barrier. Every time Guts dodged a head-on skewer attack from her was both last minute and lucky. If he tried to fight Rosine with his Golden Age sword, he'd have died. If he tried to swing for a head with Dragon Slayer, he'd have died. He was forced on the defensive by her unnatural speed and her immense released form, and had to allow her to run him through just to get a clear shot. Even after getting said clear shot, Rosine didn't die immediately. She lingered for a while, and even managed a last flight, which should have been impossible considering her condition. But she did it anyway. And that's a testament to just how strong she could have become had she properly blossomed into an apostle. If you guys still want a better explanation for why Rosine's so high on our list, we suggest that you check out her anatomy video, because it has details we've definitely skimmed through here. But what we're basically trying to say is, if you can create two separate groups of pseudo-apostles, populate them to army levels, and still have tricks like being able to create sonic booms with your body, well, you deserve to be in our top 10 all day, every day. Father Mozgus. We're only talking about the heavy hitters of Berserk, so why not start off with the strongest pseudo-apostle of them all, Father Mozgus. Those of you who haven't seen the video on his anatomy recently will know why we think that way. Those of you who haven't, you're about to be acquainted with the only man in the series that had guts panicking looking for his weakness. Yeah, that's right folks, we said panicking, because once the Black Swordsman saw that Mozgus's armor could brush off Dragon Slayer as if it were made from wood, he realized this fight was going to be tougher than most apostle fights he's had in the last 2 years, and that's a lot coming from him. Father Mozgus was Miura's interpretation of Leviathan, because many of his abilities seem to directly mirror Leviathan's. He can breathe fire, which is powerful enough to burn away the blood flow of the dead, but we're not sure whether he could boil the oceans themselves. His god armor is a suit of leaf-like plates that are stitched together so closely that they leave no opening on his entire body for guts to exploit. Even his insides are rock hard, because the Black Swordsman tried shoving Dragon Slayer down his gullet, and Mozgus chomped down on it and tried to break it. He can repel the greatest sword in living memory, so repelling axes and spears is light work for him. And most of all, Mozgus can use his wings as weapons in his released state, which allow him to rain down hundreds of steel fists upon his enemies. The only reason Guts was able to defeat this guy was because he created a covert opening in his body when he got him with Dragon Slayer mid-transformation. He noticed this opening at the last possible moment and made it bigger by stuffing explosives inside of it and then ran him through with his blade. Even after that, Mozgus tries to take Guts down with him, but not having control over his limbs sends that plan down the drain. If Mozgus had managed to transform without disruption, his armor would have probably been flawless, and Guts would have had a much bigger problem on his hands. He wasn't kidding when he acknowledged Mozgus as being at the level of an apostle, if not beyond it, and the Mad Priest's resources and resilience made him a proper fit for our top 10. War Demon Giants. These guys are a part of Griffith's larger War Demons army, but they deserve a special place because, well, each one of them is the equivalent of a siege tower filled with soldiers, metaphorically and literally. The War Demon Giants debut alongside the unit leader Grunbeld in Chapter 184, but we don't see them in action until the final battle between Griffith and Ganishka's armies. We briefly catch a glimpse of them holding up the ceiling of Ganishka's collapsing mobile palace in Chapter 283, but it's nothing special. We get a better look at them in their released state alongside their leader in Chapter 299, and to call their presence terrifying is to do them a major disservice. The two flanking Grunbeld look like dinosaurs. The one giant on the extreme left is what had happened if a Makara was an apostle, and the one on the extreme right looks like a rather twisted samurai. Apostles are huge in their released states, but these dudes dwarf their own brethren, and were the centerpiece of the War Demons' offensive against the Ganishka spawn. The War Demon Giants will be a much tougher fight than the regular War Demons if they're even half as powerful as their leader, because even Berserker Guts couldn't end that guy's life. Rakshas. Being an animated cloak of shadows is a cheat code in a world like Berserk's because it just allows you to do so much heinous crap. And believe us when we say, doing heinous things is Rakshas's MO. He was kicked out of his clan because of the unnatural amount of pleasure he derived from killing, and in his years of exile, he became one of the strongest apostles the world over. Like we said at the beginning of this entry, Rakshas is pretty much an animated cloak of shadows. His body has no permanent form, taking on whatever shape he wants it to take, yet it still possesses the full bodyweight impact of an apostle, which is great enough to thrust back the iron-fleshed Tapasa. His flowing body gives him superior movement, to the point he can easily outpace some of the greatest warriors and assassins in the world. Rakshas can hide his weapons in his shadows until they're needed, and hide himself in shadows until he's needed. And most of all, he can move his head around his entire body, which makes killing him an extremely tricky job, unless you have the fighting skills of a Guts or a Salat. Rakshas can also manipulate his body to take whatever shape is required for the task at hand, and his released state allows him to fly. With such insane abilities, you'd think he'd be higher on our list. The only reason he isn't is because his weakness is such a commonly accessible thing. Fire. Being a creature of the shadows, Rakshas despises light and mostly operates at night. He also hates fire because it has the potential to burn him to death. In fact, that's what we think happened in Chapter 341, but to be fair to him, his body hasn't been shown, and neither have that nighttime battle's consequences been addressed in the series. It's possible that Rakshas is still alive, and he's certainly much stronger than most of the War Demons, hence his role as the leader of Griffith's Search and Destroy unit. But the fact that a kid Ricket Sage was able to rocket launcher him back to Earth should be embarrassing for a killer like him, and if he does return, you can expect Rakshas to be on a whole new level. Irvine, the lone hunter that wanders the eternal night. Irvine is one of the more enigmatic characters of Berserk because we rarely see him speak. But when he does, it's either to discuss the situation at hand or call out his prey. Irvine's apostle form is one of the more unique ones out there because it has two halves that seem completely unrelated to each other. The upper half of his body looks like a demonic satyr, minus the goat head we saw on the Great Goat. This allows him to use his weapon of choice in the manner of his choosing. The lower half of his body is a horned, one-eyed wolf. Apart from helping him aim his arrows, it also allows him to chase down his prey at astonishing speeds. Even in his regular state, Irvine's arrows are lethal, and they never miss, unless you can make yourself intangible. His introduction to the series sees him decapitating multiple Kushan generals with his arrows, from an impossible distance, simultaneously. His arrows have made all the difference between success and coasting to victory on multiple occasions, even more so when he assumes his released state. Post-transformation, Irvine can use his body's fur to create arrows that expand into dozens of spikes once they enter the target's body, ripping them apart from inside. He uses these arrows to one-shot Ganishka spawns and that one cockatrice from Chapter 332 and 333. They also help his men defeat a Hydra in Chapter 356, although that offensive also includes Zod and Grunbeld. We haven't seen Irvine go up against a noteworthy enemy yet, which is why he's a lower-ranking war demon captain on our list. But that doesn't mean he's small fry. The fact that he's captain of a unit is proof in itself that Irvine is not only one of Griffith's most loyal apostles, he's also one of the strongest of his kind, period. Locus. From one unit leader to another. It's time to talk about the armored centaur of Berserk, the Moonlight Knight, Locus. Locus is in our top 5 not just because he's an exceptional warrior, which goes without saying. He's also a key part of Griffith's political machinations, because as legendary knight, Locus is quite familiar with the politics of the Western world. He's instrumental to getting Griffith's legitimacy as a war general in Chapter 284, and sits by his side in the Council of Falconia as his primary military aide. Locus truly believes in Griffith's vision for the world, which is pretty dangerous in itself, but it's his skills in the field that makes him a top 5 apostle. Locus's released form sees him turn into a majestic centaur that's covered in metal from head to hoof. His body is designed in such a way that none can hope to touch him without seriously injuring themselves, and he can impale people using his torso if he feels like it. His reach with a lance is incredible in his base form, but he becomes a merchant of death in his released state. Locus's lance transforms into a double-sided blade which can cut through the flesh of anything unfortunate enough to get caught up in it, and its size gives him an even wider range of attack, which he displays by assaulting multiple Ganishka spawns simultaneously during the final battle between the Dread Emperor and Griffith's armies. If his targets were smaller, he could skewer half a dozen of them on each side. And we haven't even mentioned the fact that he's the only other apostle besides Zod that we've seen shake off the Dread Emperor's lightning strikes. In a sea of nicked blades and dented armors, Locus alone swims untouched. His mind and his lance are amongst the greatest weapons in possession of the reborn band of the Falcon, and a showdown between him and Skull Knight is a mouth-watering prospect to say the least. Partly because they're the antithesis of each other, and partly because we think Locus could give the Wandering Wraith a tougher time than even he expects. Grunbeld. The Flame Dragon Apostle is undoubtedly one of the strongest in the entire series. I mean, the guy survived a battle with Berserker guts. There are hundreds of slaughtered Pishasha and a Dead Sea god that can attest to his strength in that state. And yet, Grunbeld left their battle with but a scar across his face and a belly full of unused flame. Speaking of which, his fires burn hot enough to burn Ganishka spawn and Hydras to death, the latter of which we imagine would be a lot tougher to do if one were to take the Herculean path. His apostle form is the most durable and destructive at the same time. He's large enough to lift stone pillars as big as Stonehenge with his mouth and rearrange them. His body is made out of corundum, which is an extremely durable ore, said to be the third hardest naturally occurring substance in the world. He managed to rearrange Guts' skeletal structure with his tail, and had he caught the Black Swordsman in a constant stream of fire, he could have burnt him to a crisp. The only reason Grunbeld sustained an injury at his hands is thanks to the Berserker armor, which broke Guts' natural bodily limits and sent him flying in Grunbeld's direction, Dragon Slayer first, at an alarming speed. Before he got the armor, he was struggling to stay alive against the guy, so we'd say its introduction was a necessity. But even with it, Guts never quite settled the score with Grunbeld, and we know his stance on grudges. As the leader of the War Demon Giants, the Flame Dragon Apostle is one of Griffith's foremost war demons, but he's also proven his top 5 status time and time again in the series. We personally can't wait to see a rematch between him and Guts, because it could be the very thing that makes or breaks him. Ganishka. Speaking of making or breaking, for a very long time, this man was hell-bent on doing the latter to the world in an effort to conquer it. A lot of that time was spent as a human, but once he tasted the power of demonkind, there was no going back for him. Soon after becoming an apostle, Emperor Ganishka tracked down Daiba and made him the wizard general of his soon-to-be-born Demon Corps. He was the catalyst behind the creation of the Daka and Pishasha, but just because he needed soldiers he could control, doesn't mean Ganishka himself was weak. In fact, it was the opposite. As long as one was in contact of the fog that was part of his body, their lives were in the palm of his hands. As an apostle, Ganishka didn't choose a regular monster form for himself. He instead chose a form that uses odd manipulation to subdue hundreds, if not thousands of sylphs and undines to create a gigantic thundercloud. This thundercloud is Ganishka's released state, and he can adjust it to pretty much whatever size and purpose he wants to use it for. Camouflage, surveillance, reconnaissance, you name it. Also, because he's a cloud, Ganishka is able to move about with lightning speed, if you know what we mean. And having brought up lightning, let's talk about that for a second. Because striking his enemies with lightning is Ganishka's primary method of battle, and that doesn't seem fair to anyone involved. Dodging lightning is like trying to find a needle in a haystack. It's nearly impossible, and the effort alone could kill you. Also, Ganishka's lightning is strong enough to fry low-level apostles to death and shock high-level apostles into inaction. On top of that, like we mentioned during our entry for Irvine, Ganishka could make his body intangible at the drop of a hat if he felt like he was being targeted. So, his defense game was pretty strong as well. His conquest of the world was going well even before he became a reincarnate, but after it, Ganishka steamrolled his way into new territory after new territory like a bulldozer. He wouldn't have done so if he wasn't confident that he could end the fight himself if it came down to it, and considering he was knowingly opposing the God Hand, we gotta give him credit for having balls of steel. This isn't the last time we'll be discussing Ganishka in this video, however, so if you've come this far, first of all, thank you. And second of all, stay tuned with us until the end. Zod. We could give you hundreds of reasons as to why the Immortal One is in our top 2. Many might be miffed to see him at number 2, but it'll make sense in a couple of minutes. We promise. So now that we've got that out of the way, where do we begin with Nosferatu Zod? This guy's been scanning battlefields for the fight of a lifetime for so long that he's come to be seen as a god of battle. His released form turns him into a more believable rendition of the Chimera, and the fact that even Skull Knight, the greatest apostle killer in history before Guts, has still not found a way to kill him means Zod must be doing something right in life. But now that we've brought up his Chimera-esque appearance, let's talk about it a bit more because it's crucial to understanding just how powerful Zod truly is. He has horns on his head to skewer his enemies, hooves on his feet to generate momentum or crush people to death, and he can spawn leather wings whenever the occasion calls for flying. This is why he was put in charge of the aerial unit of the War Demons, though he doesn't exactly play nice with his fellow apostles. And if you get lucky and somehow take his arm off, the Immortal One would just throw it at you, then reattach it to the stump and make it look like nothing happened. Zod seeks only the absolute definition of strength, and to that end, he's fought countless warriors, human and apostle alike. None could measure up to the skill and madness of Skull Knight and Guts. The latter especially delights Zod as an adversary, because with Guts, he knows, given the right push, he could become the greatest killer in the world. And fighting the greatest killer in the world was one step closer to Zod achieving his dreams. The only person to hand him his first true L in the last 300 years was Femto, who sliced off Zod's left horn as proof of his superiority over the man. From that day onward, Zod pledged himself to Griffith's service, and is now one of his main war demon captains, as well as personal mount. Considering the fact that it took a God Hand member to inflict any sort of permanent damage on Zod, we'd say hitting him might be easy, but killing him is damn near impossible. We're gonna keep a close eye on what transpires with Zod as the series comes to a close, mainly because we want to see who gets him out of the two strugglers. Shiva. And the final entry on our list is what Emperor Ganishka turns into when he dips himself within the man-made Behelit. That's right, guys. We did tell you things would come full circle by the end at the start of the video. As a once reincarnated apostle, Ganishka's tactics were all about being intangible and employing enough fog and mirrors to mask his preferred soldier's approach. But when Griffith brought him down to his knees without so much as lifting a finger, Ganishka knew he needed to do something drastic. So he chose to get reincarnated again, only this time bring as much evil abyssal energy with him as he could. The body of Shiva is a body of flesh, which means it can be cut with a blade. The problem sets in with its size, because Shiva Ganishka breaks Wyndham when it rises, and breaches the common line with its head. It has multiple tendril-like hands to crush his enemies, but it kills its own men instead, and turns them into pseudo-apostles that are as mindless as he was becoming under all this astral pressure. Ganishka could spew flames from all of his mouths, which, falling from the atmosphere, feel like the end of the world. And in this particular case, that feeling was spot on. The only reason Shiva didn't trample the world population under his feet was because he wasn't even aware of what was going on in his brain. In the end, he crumbled and started craving the very light he'd sought to extinguish, Griffith. Shiva Ganishka would have been an even more terrifying foe had he had the mental stability the Sea God does. You might have noticed from our video on his fight with Guts that the Sea God's anatomy was practically the same as Ganishka's, and Guts managed to beat the former, so there was no reason to doubt he couldn't defeat the latter as well. But then we got to thinking, and we realized that Shiva Ganishka would be far worse to deal with because it's basically insane. It has no established pattern. It'll take actions at its whim. and the concentration of abyssal energy within its body will make you feel like everything it does leads to the end of the world. If Ganishka had retained even 40% of his sanity, he'd have easily been the strongest apostle in history, because no reincarnate had ever been reincarnated twice. Marvelous verdict. So that's it for our video. Ranking these apostles was no easy task, but we think we've done justice to every single type of apostle and pseudo-apostle in the series. Let us know what you think about the list in the comments below, whether you agree or not with our rankings. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more Berserk content, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, keep struggling, strugglers.